The purpose of this podcast is to educate and inform. It does not provide legal advice. It does not create an attorney-client relationship. While the host is not a lawyer, the content is overseen by licensed counsel. If you need help with a legal matter, you should always consult with a qualified attorney.
Summer is when life gets busy, right? People are traveling, kids are out of school, professionals are maybe switching jobs, trying to catch up on continuing education. Maybe they're thinking about resigning, or maybe they're just trying to make it through the summer season. But while the schedules may change, your professional responsibilities do not pause. Your license doesn't take a summer break. So many regulatory issues do not start with a huge dramatic mistake. Sometimes they start with something really simple, a missed notice, a rushed response, a gap in documentation, or even a social media post. Maybe it's a renewal deadline that's been pushed to the back burner, something you've been aware of for a couple months but haven't taken any action on. This is Know Your Regulator. I'm your host, Simone Murphy, and today we are talking about a few summer reminders for licensed professionals, and I'm hoping that this awareness can help you easily avoid some preventable problems. We're going to get into missed deadlines, job transitions, off-the-clock conduct, documentation gaps, and some of those just casual helping out moments that can create a lot more risk than people realize. So let's get started. The first reminder is probably the most simple one, but it's also one of the most important ones, and that's deadlines do not care if you are busy or that it's summer. Deadlines don't take a vacation. And I know that sounds blunt, but it's true. If your board sends you a notice, a request for information, a renewal reminder, continuing education audit, or anything that requires a response, that timeline keeps moving whether you are on vacation, overwhelmed at work, or you're simply just not checking your mail. A lot of licensed professionals are fantastic at the work that they do. They're really careful with their patients, clients, customers, the public that they serve. But the administrative side of licensure can really sneak up on professionals if they're not aware. Your board may communicate through mail, email, or an online portal, or maybe a combination of the three. And depending on your profession, there may be some deadlines tied to renewals, doing education requirements, stress updates, employment changes, revision records, or complaint responses, which is huge. So this is your summer reminder to go back and just check your basics. Is your mailing address up to date with your board? How about your email address? Do you know how your board contacts you? Do you have access to your licensing portal to submit your continuing education? Do you know whether it's complete or whether you may have been selected for an audit? These are not super exciting questions, I know. Nobody's sitting on the beach and, reading a book and thinking, oh, well, it sounds fun. Let me just go check my licensing portal. But these things matter and they're so small, and it's so important to take the time to just check up on them, because if something is missed, it can create a much bigger issue than it really needs to be. And sometimes the board is not looking at the original issue, right? They're looking at whether the license holder has responded, whether they're cooperating, whether they're updating information, or whether they're following the board's process. So before the summer gets away from you, take about 15 minutes and just go back and do a quick basic check. Not a panic check, not something where you're kind of in this doom gloom state of mind, just a simple professional reset to make sure that you are on top of your license requirements. So the second area that I want to talk about is job changes. Summer can be a really big transition season for some industries, especially for teachers. They are thinking about whether to renew a contract, resign, maybe move districts. Healthcare professionals may be changing facilities or picking up different types of shifts. Real estate professionals, appraisers, insurance professionals, and other license holders might be changing roles, supervisors, employers, or even business structures. And when people are really ready to leave a job, especially if the job has been extremely stressful and they're burnt out, it can be really tempting to think, I'm done. I just need out. Emotionally, that is understandable. I think that there have been a lot of people who have been pushed to the brink of, I'm out of here. But professionally and regulatorily, you still have obligations that you have to think through. So depending on your profession, your license, your employer, your contract, and your board's rules, there may be issues around notices, patient or client transition, record keeping, supervision, maybe even potentially allegations of abandonment, scope of practice, confidentiality, and really The big one, documentation. This is where people can really accidentally create risk, not because they are trying to do anything wrong, but because they're moving too fast. They're frustrated, they're burnt out, they've mentally really already left the job. And I get that. But your board is not going to look at that from the emotional side. Your board's going to look at that from the professional responsibility side. So before you resign, walk out, stop communicating, delete your records, cut off access, or assume that your employer is going to just handle everything. Slow down. What are you responsible for documenting? Are there patients, clients, or consumers who might be impacted by this, by your decision or your actions? Are there records that you need to preserve? Are there supervision or delegation issues that you need to take care of? Really, a big one, are there contract terms that you need to understand? Are there board rules that apply to this transition or you leaving, you resigning, that you need to think through and take into account? Are there things that apply even after you leave? That's a huge one, that there may be some long-term consequences to the actions that you are taking now. And this is especially important when there's maybe some conflict with your employer. If you're leaving and it's sort of a bad situation or maybe a toxic situation, you might feel like your employer is just responsible for everything. And maybe they are responsible for a piece of it, maybe even a lot of it, but that does not always mean that your individual license is completely disconnected from what happens next. So the reminder here is really simple. Don't let this frustration and this burnout be the thing that makes those professional decisions for you. Take a breath. Get organized, understand your obligations, and if there is a specific legal or licensing concern, please get guidance before you go and you make that move. Now, this third one is one that I think a lot of professionals need to hear, especially during the summer season. Off the clock does not always mean off the hook. Now, I'm not saying that your board is watching your every move. They're not spying on you. There's no big brother happening here. But when you hold a professional license, certain conduct outside of work can still matter if it connects back to your honesty, your judgment, your professionalism, your fitness to practice. Public safety concerns might be something, even confidentiality concerns. Really, it's about the standards of your profession. So this can show up in a few different ways. It could be a social media post, an argument that you're having online that's pretty controversial. It could be you venting about a student or a patient or even your workplace. It could be having a side gig that actually overlaps with your profession. It's really about, does the conduct that happens outside of work raise questions for the board? Are you drinking and partying and potentially getting a DUI on the weekends? Are you going to Florida and Miami and causing some crazy ruckus and then coming back to Texas and thinking that there's, no consequences for those actions? It can sound and feel maybe really frustrating because people do want to have a personal life, and they absolutely should. But when you hold a professional license, that comes with public trust, right? And that's part of the deal, is holding yourself to a higher standard of that professionalism. The state gives you permission to practice in a regulated field because there is some public interest involved. Maybe it's health, safety, finances, education, housing, legal rights. So even when you're off the clock, your license still carries those expectations of maintaining those professional standards. One of the biggest areas here, like I said, is social media. And I want you to be really, really practical about this. Before you post something, ask yourself, could this potentially have some patient information in there, some client, student, just a customer's information? Does this maybe look like I'm giving professional advice? Could this be misunderstood as speaking on behalf of my employer? That's a huge one. Could this violate confidentiality, or could this become evidence later? And I'm not saying that to be dramatic, but screenshots exist, deleted posts don't really disappear, and group chats don't really stay private. Tone can look a lot different when you are reading just a screenshot or a few texts and there's no context. So this summer, whether you are posting vacation photos, venting about work, you're commenting on a post, you're sharing personal opinions online, just pause for a second. You are allowed to be a person, you are allowed to have a life, but you also want to be careful that you're not creating a licensing issue from something that should have been avoided with just a little bit more caution. The fourth reminder I want to go over is documentation. And I know that documentation is not the most glamorous or fun part of a profession, but it's extremely important because it tells the story of what happened later on. During summer, a lot of workplaces are dealing with coverage issues. Maybe they are short staffed, schedules are irregular, people are out. Everyone's really just trying to keep up. And when that happens, the first thing to slip is documentation. Notes get sloppy, files are not updated when they should be. Important conversations are being had verbally, but then they're not written down, and that leads to incomplete records. And then months later, you have a patient who has a question, or maybe there's a complaint filed, and everyone's just trying to piece together what happened. That's a really hard place to be. So when things get busy this summer, don't let documentation be the thing that falls apart. If you're a healthcare professional, document clearly. If you're an educator, keep appropriate records of incidents, communications, interventions. If you're an appraiser, make sure that work file supports your report. And really, if you're in any regulated profession, a real estate agent, a lawyer, an insurance agent, a dentist, dental hygienist even, any regulated field. Think about what your board would expect to see if they would review your work later on. The goal is really to document so that your professional decisions are clear. We're talking what happened. Why did you make that decision? Was there any follow up? Was there anyone you notified who was supposed to be notified? Anything that you can include to support your decision making. When your documentation is clear, it can protect you, your employer, and the people that you serve, your clients, your consumers, your patients. When it's missing or when it's vague, that's when it creates misunderstanding. And in a regulatory setting, misunderstandings can be a problem very quickly. The fifth reminder is maybe something that people wouldn't think about too much, but it should be on your top of mind this summer, and that's casual help. This is one of those things that sounds really harmless, and sometimes it can be, but sometimes you just helping out a friend can create a big licensing concern. Maybe a friend is asking you for some professional advice. Maybe a family member wants you to just look over something or review it. Maybe someone's asking to use your license, your title, your credentials just to help with the situation. And maybe you're between jobs and you could really use the extra work on the side. The problem is that informal does not always mean risk free. Depending on your profession, you may need to think about your scope of practice, the confidentiality, conflicts of interest, documentation, supervision, jurisdiction. The list goes on and on. And this is especially true if you are giving advice that someone may rely on. A casual comment to someone may feel like a really quick favor, but to the other person, they're taking that as their guidance. That's their North Star for their next actions. And if something goes wrong, that difference really matters. So before you help your friend out, your family member, whomever you may feel a need to assist this summer, pause and ask yourself, am I acting in my professional capacity? Am I qualified and authorized to do this? Does my license allow this? Could this create a conflict? And could someone reasonably rely on what I'm saying? The biggest one, would I be comfortable explaining this to my board? And the last question is just a good gut check, right? Does this feel good? Does it not feel good? That's a good gut check right there. Think about explaining it to your board. If you wouldn't want to explain it later on, slow down now. So let's look at this all together. Summer is a great time for a license reset, and professional awareness is just part of protecting your career. It should be something that you implement into your habits. This is the perfect time to do it anyways, so let's start this summer. Here's a few things that you can do just this week. Log into your licensing portal, check your license status, confirm that renewal date, review any CE requirements or any open deadlines, review your documentation habits, think about where you might be able to improve, and make sure that your board has your current email address and your physical mailing address. And throughout the entire summer, really maybe all year, think before you post online and be so careful with informal advice. If you're changing jobs this summer, maybe you're resigning, retiring, you're picking up a side gig, stepping into a new role, take the time to understand what your professional obligations are before you make a quick decision. Your license represents your ability to do the work that you've trained so hard for. It represents your credibility. It represents your livelihood. And when you understand your regulator's processes, expectations, and the common risk areas, you are in such a better position to protect yourself. So, as we close this episode and look to the summer months ahead, professionals, enjoy your time off. Take that trip, spend time with your family, rest, reset, do the things that make life feel full, but don't completely disconnect from those professional responsibilities attached to your license. Your schedule may change, your office may slow down, your out of office may be on, but your license does not take a summer break. Be sure to subscribe to Know Your Regulator and share this with a colleague who may need some summer reminders. You can also visit our website linked below for more educational resources, podcast episodes, and regulatory updates designed to help Texas licensed professionals stay informed and prepared. Until next week, stay inspired and continue engaging with your regulatory agency.
Know Your Regulator, the podcast that inspires you to engage.